Hello, and welcome to the use of methodology in humanities. Today I'm going to talk about the following issues as they appear here. So we're going to talk about identifying a research object, finding the right lens for analyzing, finding the right tools to do so, and I will finalize this class with a checklist for checking the quality of your research if you have ticked all the boxes. And this works for scholarly articles, but also for PhD chapters. So first I'm going to talk what is research. I'm going to talk about what is research, what are its objectives, what different types do we have. Then I will say something more about theory and methods. This is going to be very introductory, so I'm just going to give you guys the overview of why we use theory and methodology, but I'm not going to present you a whole array of specific theories that you can use for your research. So this is something you have to do yourself. And then I will talk a little bit more about the research design and putting this all together. So let's start. How to define research? It's a question we don't ask often. We all know this, right? So what is research? Research is what we do. It's scholars like, what are the goals, right? Here actually, based on the work of Causality, are some very interesting and nice basic definitions. So a systematized effort to gain new knowledge. That's definitely what research is. The manipulation of things, concepts or symbols for the purpose of generalizing, to extend, correct, verify, improve our knowledge. And then the final thing is actually like research work and an original contribution to what we already know as a community of scholars, right? So these are three ways to look at it. I just throwing it out there to keep it in mind, because this is a question that not many people ask. They assume that we know, but they don't think about all the implications of it. And it is necessary to know what you're actually working on and what you're actually doing in order to frame your research correctly and also know what aims it has, right? The more specific objectives of research are these four. So gaining familiarity with new phenomena, portray them accurately, so gathering data, trying to analyze them, determine how often something happens, this is also very important, and then finally to test the hypothesis. We have an assumption about how reality works, and we do research in order to test if this is true or not. And it's mostly about the last one, but like all of them, in some form or another, appear in research, right? Here we have an overview of the four general types of, four axes on which we can compare research. So general types. These are ideal types. Most research is something in between all four of them, right? So it links different elements. So first we have the descriptive versus the analytical. This is quite obvious. First tries to describe a phenomenon that we do not understand. The other one tries to analyze and explain it and find out the causality behind it. The second is to do with the purpose. Applied research is meant to solve a problem that we have. Fundamental is extend our reference frame, our understanding of certain phenomena. Then we have the typical and the oldest quantitative versus qualitative research. One, of course, is by measuring the amount of observation. The other one is by going into cases and like using a smaller amount of cases, but going much deeper into their details. So this is not about counting something, how often something occurs, or how often something is correlated and trying to find causations out of larger data. It's about really either through field work or through library work or otherwise trying to find out what causes what. Both are useful, and they should not be considered a zero-sum game, that one excludes the other. Actually, there's so much amazing research that has what they call mixed methods and actually combine both elements. And then the final is conceptual and empirical. Conceptually is more like we would call deductive. So it starts from theory and it tests theory by applying it to different examples. Empirical is more inductive in the sense that we start with gathering data, and based on their laws of behavior or interaction or the patterns in which they appear, we try to make new laws, new understanding, new rules, new theory. So This is very basic, but still it's quite important to know this. Before I will talk about the concepts, the theoretical lenses, and the methods, it's very important to actually think about what is your discipline. So I'm going to go back one slide, because these 4 types of research, most of them can appear in any discipline, right? And here I'm thinking you really need to know what your object of analysis is in your discipline. So say, for instance, the differences between life sciences and exact sciences, right? Life sciences studies something that is alive. But then there's huge differences between biology, psychology, and political science, right? They're all life sciences in a way. And some of them, of course, are all life. Others are smaller and look only at humans, right? But then again, some don't, because we also have political science of animals, right? So they overlap. So you really need to know what you're actually working on. And to give an example, what's the difference between psychology, sociology, and political science? To keep this lecture within the realm of humanities. What is the difference? But if you cannot answer that question, it means that you haven't thought about what your research object really is. Like, they all analyze humans, right? But psychology is mostly concentrated on one human and what he or she thinks and what goes on in his or her head, how this affects emotions, behavior, and also relationship to larger groups, mostly close family, friends, external environment. When it comes to sociology, here we have a larger group of people, so more than 3 people, has to be a group, and their internal relations and hierarchies. That's important. And political science is the same, but here we have the same group plus political power. And this is what makes political science as a group, as a discipline, a smaller subgroup or subset of a larger sociology. And you need to know what this actually is and actually encompasses, because if not, it's very hard to assess where the boundaries of your traditional field end and where other fields start. It's also necessary to identify interesting overlaps here. So, this being said, now I'm going to look at theories and methods. Methods is a difficult word, not by itself, but because it has so many different uses, right? So methods can refer to either the research type, either the real research methods that you're applying in order to analyze your results, and then also the research techniques that you use when implementing these methods. So it has many, methods is a very universal catch-all concept, and that makes it very confusing to deal with, but actually it encompasses all of these 3 things. That's why I will distinguish here, right? When it comes to theory, well, I'm only looking at a couple elements here. I'm looking at the use and the importance of concepts, both to define and to classify, and then in general theoretical lenses. Once again, I'm not going to give you a whole range of theories that you can use. I will give some examples from political science or general humanities, but if you need to figure out what theoretical lenses you need for your research, the only way is actually to take handbooks of methodology, read them, study them, and figure out what works for you. Also to read up in your literature review what has been used most often to study certain phenomena and how you can improve upon this, how a different approach actually cannot be applied or can apply it, or so this is not something I can cover in one lecture. That would be completely impossible. I'm just giving you the meta overview here of why we use these methods and what the whole point is, right? And before I go into the details here, why do we use theories, right? Well, reality is endlessly complex. We cannot capture it. It would have too much data, right, in order for us to understand. So what do? We take a lens, a theory, and we apply it as a kind of magnifying lens, or like a microscope on a certain phenomenon, and this can be a social phenomenon, doesn't matter. We only start looking at a couple of things. It's like you use a filter and you only see certain colors, and based on these colors and their patterns you try to make interferences for the whole phenomenon. So it's always reductionist, as I also have said in other videos. So as soon as you apply a lens, you're ignoring often more than you're actually looking at. But what you are looking at, you are studying more closely, and here you try to contemplate, to find out and to study the relationship between your different observations. And observations here depend. So it can be human behavior with political power, it can be the hierarchy, it can be psychological relations. Depending what your discipline is, your phenomenon that you study will be different, right? But say, to keep an example from political theory, both comparative politics of IR, it's always a group of people with political power. It can be institutions are the same, right? It's a group of people creating norms, creating a system of organizing. So it always, in the basic level, this is really a group of people in political power works both for comparative politics and comparing political systems, but also from IR. A country is also a group of people with political power, right? So that's why it's very important to get back to the basics and understanding your research objects of your discipline. So these lenses, they only look at certain elements of it. And that's actually what you do. So by doing that, you also have to immediately accept the limitations of your research. This also will allow you to draw a clear line between what you can do and what you cannot do with your particular theoretical lens. And the best way is also to methodologically look this up and also look for other pitfalls and biases, right? Because say that you're studying states, you want to study the viability of states and you're using the European example. Well, there are certain biases there, right? If you want to use states and make generalizations about states throughout history and you're only using contemporary examples, well, you have what they call the historical fallacy, right? That, for instance, all the states that we have now in Europe are the ones that survived. So we only can if you're only studying contemporary states, you're only studying the durable states, the ones that survived. But if you go back 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, you will see that Europe has so many more polities, so many more states or stateless or proto-states that didn't make it, that merged with other states, that did not maintain their independence. So if you want to infer and make generalization about a state, you cannot only look at contemporary examples. And these are the biases and the problems that you have. So you have limitations by the lenses that you use, but also by the amount of data that you choose to observe. And this is very important when it comes to choosing your research type, research methods, and techniques. So each set of choices will come with a certain amount of limitations. And you have to be aware of these limitations in order to say, this is what I do, and this falls beyond the scope of my research. I don't have the tools to study this, or the observations that I have gathered and that I want to analyze. Because of their nature, their characteristics, I will not be able to make generalizations that go beyond a certain year or something. So this is very important from a methodological perspective to keep in mind all of these limitations. Diving in, theory. So what is one of the most important things is, of course, definitions. And here we have a definition of a definition. And why do we use this? Well, we use this in order to have a typical and a clear statement of how we define, how we characterize certain concepts, certain elements, certain phenomena, so that other people can actually, when they try to study the same phenomenon, they actually know that we're talking about the same thing. If you if you watch my video about reading and syntopical reading, this is actually the coming to terms with authors. It's also one important aspect in trying to understand how other authors that you read define their core concepts. And if they do so, if they do differently, then you need to know what is the difference and what other conclusions do they draw from their observations and their study by defining their research objects or their theoretical concepts differently. And this is very important. There are numerous examples. A very typical example of political science is the definition of terrorism. If you only define this as an act of evil by a subnational group, then you really narrow down very specifically what you consider terrorism, and other forms that could be or can be defined as terror or political terror by other observers will be excluded because of your choice of your definition, right? So these are typical examples. Every discipline has them, and that's why it's very important to define your own concepts and to very clearly state these definitions. Another way that's also very important is making classifications, typologies, explanatory typologies. This is a typology of a typology, or like an example typology taken by Ellman, who has very interesting work on this, on how to make qualitative and explanatory typologies. So do check out his work, his references at the end of this presentation in the bibliography. Why are typologies important? Well, it's the same as with definitions. A definition defines one concept, a typology defines one object in relation to another and draws clear distinction. This falls in here, in this group, and this falls in that group. This is also very important for quantitative research because mostly when you have a whole set of data, you need to sort through them, classify them first, and then start comparing them. And this classification is usually not done before and is done by the researcher. And here, having a clear typology with clear criteria that doesn't only sort them by description, but actually gives you inherent hypothesis or inherent explanation of this is classified, and this classification says something more about the object that is being classified. This is very important to have tools and techniques and frameworks to handle your data and understand and lay them out in a comprehensive manner so you can actually compare it. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to say more about typologies, but if you like, classifications are a core element of research, right? Then the theoretical lenses, where there's so many different lenses, right? So you can have the large lenses that look at the highest elements or like the most broadest structure. You can have in between middle range theories that only explain particular elements. You can have theories focusing on the behavior of units or like the units within your discipline that you're analyzing, and only that. So you have so many different lenses at so many different levels, but the main goal is that they try to explain causality. They try to explain why and how something causes something else. The goal, of course, is to do research. The goal is to improve our understanding of social, political, historical phenomena. So the text here is related mostly to political and social sciences, but this goes for all humanities. Causality is very important. And each theory at each level, of course, has its own methods, and each method has a series of techniques that you can use. And that is the next step. I will go back here. Like so, remember that I talked about types, methods, and techniques. Well, here this is an overview also from Causality. So, for instance, types of research would be field work, live research, or laboratory research, depending what discipline you are in. So mostly within the humanities, we would be dealing with library research and field research. But not only, like even in psychology, you can have laboratory work in which you invite people, and in a sterile, isolated environment, you give them some tests and you work with them. So there's different ways of doing that. The methods, well, they're all written here. So here we see actually what are you going to do, how are you going to approach within certain realms, certain types of research, what are you going to do? I'm going to analyze historical records. Are you going to do interviews with people in order to understand social phenomena? Are you going to look and observe people and their interactions? So there's so many different methods of doing that, and then you have a whole list of techniques that you can use for this. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just want to show the differences between type, methods, and techniques, and once again underline that it's very confusing that all three of them are called methods by researchers. So they can talk about different elements using the same word here. So a research methodology, this is actually the zoom in. So you've chosen a lens to look at reality, and your research methodology is actually the thing that allows you to zoom in and focus on the object that you chose to analyze through this lens. And the research techniques is actually the way of getting there, of getting the data and interpreting them, or classifying them, or sorting them, so you can make wider conclusions about how often they appear, what causes what, and so on. And this is both the same for qualitative and quantitative research. This is so universal, it's so like meta for research, that all of these questions are relevant. So are the sources that I choose, are they relevant? So if I try to represent something by selecting this set of observations, can these observations actually represent the phenomenon that I want to study? Say, to give an example, say you want to study, you want to measure, so quantitatively, quantitatively, you want to measure the fragility of states, say in different continents, and you want to find out how strong is a state. And your interpretation is not to look at military power or economy, but you want to see how strong are their welfare programs, how good can they treat their citizens, how to use this with more biased developed is a state. I'm taking distance for the word because it's also incurs a value judgment of what is developed and undeveloped, and same with like failed states and so on. So I'm leaving that there. But say you want to measure state strength and how they penetrate society and can actually provide services to their citizens. How do you measure that? Now, for instance, a proxy to do this is to check the amount of vaccines that they can give to young children before the age of 5. So if a country has a vaccine rate which is 99 or 99.5, then you know that they have a very strong penetration of society. They can offer these crucial services to almost the entire population of their state. If it's 50%, 45, then you have a measure, a quantitative indicator to measure this. This is of course a proxy. This will not say everything about state strength, but for your research purposes and your definition of state strength, this might be enough in order to compare countries, right? So this is linking sources and data relevant to your research. Then, are your data complete? If you're talking about states, are you talking about all the states? Are you talking about is your group of observation inclusive enough, or does it dismiss more? What are the criteria to dismiss and include cases? Then, are they truthful, objective? Has the data been played with? For instance, if you want to use data from different countries that actually falsify their data for various reasons, because, for instance, dictatorships, and they want to lie about their freedoms that they offer to their citizens. These things, like you need to check these. You need to check these data if you can actually use them, if they're objective enough, and even not, what is the margin of error that you can include if they're quantitative. And then no selection data. Did you choose the data in order to fit your research, and then because of that you come to the right conclusions? So based on when you choose cases, for instance, and you only have a limited amount of cases, do they match what you're already trying to prove? Or do you actually choose cases that actually challenge what you're trying to prove? So this is also very important. You have different ways of dealing with that. I'm going to give you some examples. So for instance, when it comes to general comparative methods, both inductive and deductive, so using the data in order to draw wider theories, create theory, inductive, or deductive, having theories and using this as a point of departure in order to apply them to data and see if we can understand both the theory better and see what cases don't fit and then improve our theory afterwards. So this can be both done qualitatively or quantitatively. Qualitatively would mean a small amount of cases. Small means less than 5. There are some ways to do it with medium N, which is less than 50 cases. I personally use these medium N studies as well for qualitative. So for instance, in my PhD, I use 15 case study. That's a lot, but it gives you enough. So I was using Ragin's qualitative comparative analysis in order to test some theory. So I had a whole theoretical frame, which was I put together based on existing literature. I used 15 case studies in order to test the theory, and these case studies gave me enough feedback, enough results that I can actually see which causalities are more important than others and restructure my theory in order to make it better. So medium N can also be useful. It's more work, but your case studies are a little bit less in detail than the small n because you have more of them. So you already have a strong and clear hypothesis that you're testing in each cases, while in the small n you can, for instance, have one hypothesis and you go really deep in order to find the causality and seeing if this works. So it all depends how you use that. You can use, for instance, one case to test the theory, and you're choosing a case which goes completely against the theory, and you're trying to find out, does this improve our theory, or is the case just something else? So what can we learn about this? So this also, like, even a one case study can be crucial in order to test a widely accepted theory and criticize it, for instance. Then we have the MSD and the MDSD. So this means most similar system design, in which you select your cases, both small or medium n, and you try to find cases which are almost similar in outcome, right? So you want to find out, like, they all have the same outcome, and you want to check how does that work. And then you have the most different system design, in which your cases are all different, and some of them have the same outcomes, other not, and you're trying to find what makes a theory, like what makes a phenomenon start and not. So there are two ways of doing that. And the same with quantitative, right? So here, if you use statistical analysis, you can still use medium n or large n. Large n is more than 50 cases, observation in this case. And both these frames work. You have other ways of doing this, so this is just the basis, but this is in general how you would use both in comparative methods, inductive, deductive, qualitative and quantitative methods for your research. When you, for instance, are doing system analysis or using structuralism, you also have different levels of analysis. You can look at the wider system, create a theoretical system in order to analyze and hypothesize the relationship between its different elements. You can look at subsystems like middle range theory, or you can look at the behavior of a certain unit within a larger structure. And then you have different elements you can analyze. The functional elements, so which elements or which dimensions contribute and keep a system intact, which makes dysfunctional dimensions or elements break down the system. How is this normative? So in what regard can the system be applied to different phenomena and so on? Institutional elements, relational elements. So there are different ways of dealing with this, with analyzing structures. So that's all I'm going to say about this, just to highlight different methods and the different approaches. Historical methods, because mostly we're talking about analytical methods, empirical methods, didactic methods, but you also have descriptive methods. Not all historical methods are descriptive, but many of them are actually trying to figure out what actually happened, and they're going very much back using archaeology, data, literature, whatever they can find in order to reconstruct the most objective part of our reality. And they always will say, okay, we're biased the way how we see things. We cannot see things with the same eyes as the people did at the same time. But the effort is to create an objective narrative of events as they happened, so we can draw more neutral conclusions from them and reinterpret these phenomena within their historical time frame more objectively. That would be an historical method. Then you have the legal institutionalist, in which you look at formal rules and norms and you track them. You see how units or actors behave according to them or break them. Why does this happen? How did these norms and ideas evolve over time? So that's also a way to work in social science or political sciences. And then the behavioral elements or behavioral methods, in which you look at, for instance, game theory. You create a game theoretical model in how actors make rational choices, why to do this and why to do that. And based on this theory, you try to explain their behavior, which of course is difficult when it comes to humans, because not all behavior is rational. But still, a rational choice implies this, and based on the amount of information that actors have, they will try to make choices that they consider positive or useful for them, right? So these are different approaches. I just want to highlight this. These are all descriptive methods in a way. Then research design. And this is actually, I will probably talk about this more elsewhere. So we talked about defining your discipline, the research object, the research objects of your discipline, like the basic unit that you analyze. Then we have a research topic, and then we have a research question. And mostly when I interact with my students and they have to come up with a research topic and research question, they were able to come up with a research topic fairly easy, but they never had a question. So for instance, what do you want to analyze? I want to analyze, I don't know, the democratization of Kazakhstan. That is not a question. That is a topic. You are working on democratization theories and you have found an area where you want to apply these theories. But you have no question. A question has a question mark at the end, so you really need to be able to answer, and should not be a yes or no question. If you have a yes or no question, it's probably, I don't say always, but it's probably not a good research question in the humanities. So, is Kazakhstan democratizing or not? Yes or no? Yeah, this is not probably a good research question. Or like, does democratization work in Kazakhstan? Yes or no? This is not going to get you far, because you're actually not making any assumptions to understand reality. You're just checking something in a box. So you need a research question that actually has many potential answers. And these answers, which you make up, which you posit, which you propose, are your hypotheses. And it's these that you have to test while doing your research. And in order to test them, you need a theoretical lens and the appropriate methods and methodological techniques to test them. So, say for instance, here we have different issues, democratization. These are trends like democratization, globalization, migration. Also, once again, examples from political science, IR. And we have different issues. We have different actors. So you can combine any of these three and come up with a research topic, right? But none of these will be research question unless you frame them in such a way that you have a question mark at the end. And doing research without a hypothesis, well, it actually makes things more difficult. If you think you can actually do research without actually having a clear hypothesis, something you want to test, you will keep reading and keep writing, and everything that you encounter, every aspect of reality will seem like an answer to your question, or will adhere or can be linked to your research topic. So if you don't specify your topic and you don't specify your question and you don't start proposing potential answers to your research question, you will be like a mosquito on a nudist beach. You will know what you want more or less, but you don't know where to start. And this is one of the it takes a while. It's not that easy. It really takes a while. Like once you're already have a research field that you have experience in, it's very easy to make to come up with new research questions and research topics. But at the beginning of your PhD, it's not easy, as you really need to read what's there, what hasn't been done, what are interesting debates, and what is manageable for me as a PhD student to tackle, to research, and is it interesting enough to do for such a long time, like 3 years, 4 years, and are these results relevant? Do people care actually? Is it new? Does it contribute to our knowledge? You can always find something that nobody knows, but that doesn't give any value to the community, right? You have to give value to the academic community by coming up with original new ideas that people care about, right? In order to do that, you need to know first what's out there, what has been done, what are we talking about now. And these things change. If you look at the research debates, or like the debates within different fields, now 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they're completely different. The world changes, especially in social political sciences. So these things evolve. So you need to know what people are talking, the academic community in your field is talking about now. And you need to link up with that. You can come up with an older topic that you can revise and redo, but it has to have value for an academic community that is still talking about it now. And this is reading, reviewing what's there, and then you will be able to come up with something. When it comes to causality and hypothesis, well, here are some examples in how they can have relations. And once again, when it comes to, and this is a difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. In quantitative research, because of the statistical methods that they usually implement, they actually can't fully share if something is causal or not. They can have a very high degree of certainty, but what they actually measure is a correlation. How often something appears and afterwards another phenomenon appear, and they try to link and see how often this correlates, these two observations. And what they try to say is these two elements are causally linked. That is what they try to do. They're not stupid about it, so they use theoretical frameworks. They don't imply these things, not because two things are, it's not like, why do old people and flamingos always appear in the same place in the United States? You have a higher concentration of older people around flamingos. Do the flamingos fly to the old people, or do the old people come to the flamingos? What is it? Well, the underlying causal reason is warm climate. Because of a warm climate, more elder people migrate to these places to sit like after they retire, and the same climate is very is good for flamingos, so that's why they appear. So they're correlated, but there's no causality between them. So this is what you need to think about when you're actually framing these things. And also, even in qualitative research, you really need to get to the bottom and see if things are not just correlated, but if they really are causal. And that's why your hypothesis mostly exists out of one or two elements that actually explain the causal link between A and B. And it's this one that you're going to investigate. And this one, if you can find empirical evidence for this or against this, you will prove or disprove your hypothesis. And that is actually what you're doing in your research. To finalize here, these are the different stages of research. I get a bit irky when I see them actually, like this is probably how they should look in your final outlook, like when you're structuring your text in your PhD or even in a paper. So it's useful to have an overview of what should come first. But don't let this be gospel, because it really depends how you're doing, what you find out in the meantime during your research, and how you have to, for instance, reevaluate your theoretical framework before moving in a new direction if something doesn't work. Sometimes you encounter stuff and say, okay, this is not the way forward. I have to go back. I can still use the same topic, but I have to focus on something else because I can't find it. I don't have the data, or it doesn't work, or doesn't make sense. There's another reason, and then you have to incorporate that into. There's another factor interfering in the correlation that I try to find. So this is a factor I have to reintegrate in my theoretical framework, make it better, and then I have to do my tests again. So this is useful as a reference point, but as you will work and construct your research project, you will probably get on it quite differently. Also, reviewing, if you're doing research for 5 years, you can do your literature review, but you will be amazed how much stuff comes out on your topic by the end of the 5 years when you're ready. And then you have to revise the literature review and actually see if other people did the same thing and came to the same conclusions. So especially if you're working on a hot topic. Or what if your topic becomes no longer hot for some reason or another throughout your research. So you really need to know also that if something is going to be relevant to the academic community in 5 years still. Sometimes you can't really, I've known people who, for instance, have working on European integration and Ukraine and prospects of future inclusion, and then the Russian-Ukrainian war broke out, and this put all prospects of EU integration, future EU integration, off the table for a long time to come, and actually disqualified or made their research less relevant for the academic community. And that's very painful because nobody was expecting this. So just saying, use this as a reference point. Do check out Kotari. Like he has quite interesting, like his references also in the bibliography. And then finalizing here, this is a final checklist. So when it comes to this checklist, you will see it's on both slides here. you have the most important questions that you should reflect upon after writing and see if you actually have checked all these different boxes. So if you go through this checklist, you will see the it's something you need your time to do this. You also have to be really honest with yourself. So like, no, they're a good questions. I adapted from Humanities. They're written for writing for communication theory. This is a checklist for that field. I've adapted them for the general purposes of humanities. So first, if you're writing or working on theory, is the need for theory intervention justified? Is this worth analyzing deeper? Is the issue that you use, that you want to analyze, is it actually relevant to the field that I'm working in? And then, do I clearly state what I'm planning to do and where my theoretical framework cannot go? What are the limits of my theoretical framework? Then, does it engage with all the relevant literature? Did I check? Does it connect with the existing debates and the most important literature available on this topic, or on this theory, or within this field? Did I find enough interesting point of departure, or is it actually completely terra nova and what I'm analyzing hasn't been discussed by the field, but it is relevant, but there's no theoretical framework yet, so I'm making the first step. So this is fine. Sometimes you cannot tick all these boxes, but then you have to know, am I doing something really innovative? Am I making the first steps, or am I doing something that's completely irrelevant? Like, these questions are meant to reflect on these things. It's better to reflect on while you're doing the research, but also at the end, after you've written something, it's nice to check and see if your text and your paragraphs need, if you need to add some new elements or some final elements to your text in order to make sure that all these elements are covered within your narrative and your argumentation. So are the ideas new? Is it an original contribution? Are all the terms and concepts explained? This is not, I didn't have this checklist when I was doing my PhD. For instance, I wrote about transitions from personalist rule in sub-Saharan Africa, and one of my reviewers at my PhD committee, my public defense, like in the review of my PhD, said, like, you never defined the transition. You never gave me a definition of what you consider a transition, a regime transition. And he was completely right, of course. I did use it consistently throughout and in line with how the academic community uses it within that certain subfield. But it's true, I never defined it. And this, I corrected this afterwards, like in after research. So it's a nice checklist to actually go back and see if you checked all your boxes. Does the paper have a clear line of clear line of argument? And then there are more questions. I'm not going to go through all of them. Is the language accessible? If you use empirical evidence, is there a clear link between the theory and the evidence? So check this list and use it. If you quote this list for any reason, also don't forget to mention Humanities and this reference, because that's the original. And that's where I'm going to stop. This is enough for theory. So I hope this gives an overview of what research is, why we do it, and what's the whole point of methodology, right? And actually using a lens to zoom in on your specific topics that are predefined by your field, then choosing your own, making them into questions, trying to find the causality to explain different phenomena, and using hypothesis to really clearly state what this causality is about, and then trying to prove it while doing your observations. That's it in a nutshell when it comes to methodology in humanities. And thank you for your attention, and check out my other videos. This is the bibliography that I used, and my other videos will be about writing, reading, and probably smaller things like making references and using productivity tools. So more is coming up. Okay, goodbye.